Hello. Hello, ESS, lab/class, all of you. And I have switched it up a little bit. I'd like to talk about Chapter 12, considering the whole pandemic situation. It'll just be good to us to segue into the human health risk chapter, even though this was not on our schedule. And yeah, we'll be talking about a lot of different diseases and bacteria, and it's not meant to alarm you. It's kind of meant to show you that this pandemic is pretty crazy, but it's also very normal. We've dealt with this in the past. We're going to deal with this in the future. So we're going to learn more about it together. So this first video, we'll see how far I get. Probably will not go through the entire 63 slides, probably break this up. But let's start chapter 12, human health risk. So just double checking. Okay, that is recording. So yes, another broad statement. This book loves broad statements. And human health is affected by a large number of risk factors. Three here that we're going to talk about are physical risk factors, biological, and also chemical. So what do we mean? We have physical risks. I like to think of something like a tornado or any kind of natural disaster, accidents, breaking your arm, falling down the stairs, things like that. And also we can consider the radiation from the sun. So, or X-rays, any type of electromagnetic radiation, excessive amounts of that. Those are physical risks to humans. Biological risks are the ones that really connect with what we're dealing with the coronavirus right now. And it's a disease brought on by a number of, could be bacteria, it could be viruses, it could be something else, but it's impairment of your body. And there's specific sets of symptoms and signs to characterize a specific disease. And then chemical risk. We've kind of talked about chemical risk a little bit so far in our course, certainly from water, other sources like that. But there's naturally occurring chemicals like lead and arsenic. There's also anthropogenic sources. So these are things that humans produce, pesticides, solvents that we release into the environment. So looking at some of the leading causes of death in general, if we look on the left here, this is from 2004, so it's not quite up to date. But big one here, cardiovascular diseases, and cancers is 13%. There's also just a lot of other different categories. But if we look at infectious diseases, and this is what's going to be related to what's going on right now in the world, 26% of leading causes of death are from those. And if we break those down, most of them are respiratory infections. That would be your coronavirus type infection. HIV/AIDS is still a pretty high amount, 21%. Malaria, tuberculosis, these are things that we don't deal with in America too often, but they're still very important in other parts of the world. So we're going to be talking a lot about these type of diseases here. So we're really in the realm of biological risks right now. So what is an infectious disease? Well, it's a disease caused by some sort of agent. We also use the term pathogen for that. And pneumonia, for example, that comes from bacteria. We have influenza comes from a flu virus. There are worms, there are organisms. All these type of things are pathogens that can affect or that can give us a disease. Two different types, two different broad categories. Chronic, so this happens over time, slowly impair our function, and acute is something that's more rapid onset of those underlying effects of your disease. And I'm going to go to this next spot here. I'm going to skip a slide for now. But let's look at low versus high income countries for a minute. So if we look at low income countries and we see the percentage of total um, health risks, we notice high cholesterol is way at the bottom and low weight during childhood is way up at the top. So that you think, okay, they're not eating a diet that has high cholesterol. They're not getting enough food. That's the leading cause of those leading risk. If you look at down here, the higher income countries, look at the top. Tobacco use, number one, high blood pressure, usually due to a poor diet and poor exercise. Obesity, physical inactivity, all of these tied together. High blood glucose, high cholesterol, all of this bad diet choices. So the problem is we have lots of access to good food, but a lot of higher income countries choose to simply skip those and do what they want. So that's a huge issue. Much different set of health risks to lower income countries than high income. So just the place you're born, just literally where you're born, you happen to be, has a very direct effect on what type of health risks you're going to be exposed to. So, still thinking about biological risk for the moment, we're going to talk about just a few of very historically important infectious diseases: plague, malaria, and tuberculosis. So, plague, it's also called the bubonic plague or Black Death. This was a huge problem multiple times in multiple centuries of the world. This disease came about and it's caused by one bacterium, Yersinia pestis. So this can be spread. They looks like it originated in lives and fleas that are associated with rats. So the Black Death you can think of back in the Middle Ages, and a lot of rats everywhere. People didn't understand how disease was spread. So these rodents would go onto a ship, travel across the country, travel here and there, and the fleas you would be exposed to the fleas from the rats, and then this bacterium would get into your system. And yet, it killed hundreds of millions of people. It was a huge problem because we just did not have the scientific understanding of what it was. So when you think of plague, we're talking about a bacterial infection. So a living bacteria infects your body. Malaria, on the other hand, is another historical killer, but it still affects a lot of people today. So malaria, especially in Africa, and a lot of children, sadly, get infected with malaria and die each year. And this is a cause for concern because malaria can be spread through mosquitoes fairly easily. So there's a lot of research done on how mosquitoes operate. How do we combat against the spread of mosquitoes? Because if we can stop the spread of mosquitoes, we can stop the spread of malaria. And actually, Dr. Ethan Degner, one of our new professors, um, he studies this. He studies mosquitoes. So really cool that he's working on that. So malaria isn't caused by just one species here, but a variety. But the important part is that they live inside and incubate in mosquitoes, and that's how they're transmitted to people. And this is only eradicated from the US in 1951, as in we completely got rid of it to the degree where it's not a threat to society. But that was only 1951. And it's still a problem in many parts of the world today, especially in Africa. And yeah, we don't have a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine for it. We treat it with typical methods, like we're treating coronavirus. There's no vaccine, so we treat it with just getting you through the symptoms and using different kind of drugs. This is just showing the kind of mosquito nets that people use in those parts of the countries. So you, as much as you can, you want to avoid exposure to mosquitoes. So really simple but effective way to avoid exposure is to sleep in these nets. Put these nets around your sleeping areas. Mosquitoes can't mess with you at night. So very important that everybody in those areas use those. The third very historically important infectious disease would be tuberculosis, specifically caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And this is still active around the world, but it's not that easy to get it. You have to be infected directly from somebody who has tuberculosis. And yeah, it's not, thankfully, it's not that easy to spread. But tuberculosis is still very important infectious disease to keep in contact with. And you'll have heard of TB tests. So these tuberculosis tests, a lot of different type of jobs, certainly nurses have to get tuberculosis testing because they deal with so much of this type of unsanitized areas in hospitals and things like that. So still very important infectious disease to keep track of. And notice it says historically active, yes, and it's estimated that 1/3 of the population actually has it. But it doesn't always produce very bad effects. But we've really, really, really clamped down on tuberculosis, and it can be cured through antibiotics. So it's long-term and expensive, but we can cure that disease. See, a lot of these diseases, we develop drugs that kill these bacteria. Viruses are a lot more tricky to destroy, but a lot of research goes into understanding what can kill these bacterium. So we have drugs for tuberculosis. The problem, though, with these drugs is that once they're with these bacteria is that when you use a drug on them, they mutate very rapidly and their DNA evolves quickly to combat against the drugs. They develop different layers and different compounds and different things that block the drugs from getting in their system or they adapt to the drug. So drug resistant strains are the ones that are really scary because they do not get killed by the typical drugs that we've developed to kill those things like tuberculosis. Okay, so let's just quickly review here what we've gone through in this first little section. We've been really focusing on biological health risks for this first set of PowerPoint slides. And we've seen that a lot of infectious diseases out there. The really old one, plague, killed millions of people, and thankfully that one's very, very, very rare in the world today. Malaria, though, is still a huge problem, and tuberculosis is also a still pretty big problem. But those are just three really historically important infectious diseases. There's quite a few more we could talk about, but it's good to get an idea of those. The next presentation after this, I'm going to stop here. We're going to talk about emergent diseases, as in more historically recent emerging diseases. This is where we're also going to talk about the coronavirus a little bit because that's part of this list now. So look forward to our next section, and I will talk to you guys soon.